Welcome back to the 2023 Nasher Prize Dialogues Graduate Symposium, where we are exploring the work and influence of 2023 Nasher Prize laureate Senga Nengudi all week long. I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed all the presentations, and I'm so excited to hear the presentation today, as well as our future programs. I am Dr. Lauren Cross, your moderator. And for those of you who are joining with us for the first time, this is a lunchtime virtual series of talks exploring the key themes and practices within Nengudi's work, the impact of her artistry, her use of everyday materials, remaking, and resiliency, as we heard yesterday. And today, our highlighted presentation will explore themes of plasticity in her work. As a reminder, all symposium sessions this week are being live streamed through Vimeo and are available for viewing if you missed anything or want to revisit any session. You can access it through the link for Tuesday or Wednesday's program. Today, we have our presentation on today's highlighted topic presented by Zoe Roden and Macaella Gray, who are both writers and curators based in Austin, Texas. Both received a BA in art history from the University of Texas at Austin and are currently enrolled in the Land Arts of the American West graduate program at Texas Tech University. Their research interests include 20th century little magazines, histories of sexuality, and American serialisms. They have a shared practice of collaborative writing, research, and curatorial practice since 2019. Thank you to our international audience for tuning in today. And please help me in welcoming Macaella Gray and Zoe Roden.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gross, for that introduction. We're really excited to be here. In her text for Side by Side, Maren Hassinger describes her ongoing practice with Senga and Nengudi by adopting an assemblage of pronouns. Alternating between we, us, I, she, Maren, and Senga, Hassinger textually simulates the multiple subjectivities and configurations of memory that constitute collaboration. She forgoes personal certainty to elucidate a more complete image of their process as she sees it. If I maintains an opaque subjectivity defined in terms of discrete minds and bodies, Hassinger's poetics offer transparency, a window onto the ways in which collaboration disorganizes the infrastructure of our innermost selves.
Maren Hassinger and Senga Nengudi have been working together and apart for nearly 5 decades. Their collaboration is stretched across mediums, geographies, and distances between them. The pair maintains that their interpersonal relationship is inseparable from their working one, or in Hassinger's words, "We've kept each other such good company all these years, and we've had so much fun doing it, that it's hard to separate the abiding friendship from issues of theory and practice." This continuity between practice and companionship is by no means isolated to Hassinger and Nengudi, as the reality of participating in a long-term collaborative practice lends itself to an entanglement of both. While it's a truism that only Nengudi and Hassinger will ever know the interior and transient aspects of their relationship, those fleeting moments, conversations, and shared intimacies, there remains a potent public desire to know the inner workings of their dynamic, as if accessing these unknowns is critical to understanding the work they produce. In this way, their relationship emerges as an object, subject to analyses akin to the artworks they have made together. Where historians and curators speak of Nengudi and Hassinger in terms of a shared biography, personal memories, and narrative insights, their practice, which might otherwise live in abstraction, becomes concrete. Through description, undefinable traces are filled out, and their process is reduced into a falsely stable historical object.
Like Hassinger's maneuvering of semantic conventions to express the competing subjectivities of collaboration, we find that the multimedia performance and video Side by Side espouses a visual poetics that opposes descriptive models. In this presentation, we formally analyze the video component of Side by Side, expressly focusing on the incorporation of montage and archival performance documentation from the mid-1970s to their present day. We understand side by side as a framework for understanding the mechanics of Nengudi and Hassinger's relationship, one which accentuates the process of remembrance and co-creating itself. Rather than perpetuate models of description that reduce collaboration into knowable objects, side by side becomes about the movement between moments, spaces, times, feelings, and transient states along the nonlinear and interior trajectory of Nengudi and Hassinger's collaboration. The formal organization of side by side frees it from any obligation to mimesis, as Hassinger and Nengudi approximate the movement of this abstract experience in a form that best attends to it.
Created to commemorate their decades-long collaboration, Side by Side is anchored in an intimate studio space where Nengudi and Hassinger prepare performance at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain. The video begins with clouds drifting across the frame and a shadowy hand cast against an otherwise empty white wall. In a series of photographs, the partners are pictured individually with a hand superimposed over the bottom right corner of the image. After the hand counts to 3 and then to 5 3 times after that, Nengudi and Hassinger embark in a shared choreography where they appear diegetically together for the first time. In moving images, they dance around, between, underneath, alongside one another, as if their interpersonal reunion occasions filmic flow. This setting, recognizable to the viewer by the studio and later Nengudi's Colorado Springs home, is intercut with documentation of previous performances. In nearly chronological order, this documentation includes photographs and video of Performance Piece, Nylon Mesh and Maren Hassinger, High Noon, Ceremony for Freeway Fetes, Alive, Flying, Voices, and Dance Card. The first video is of Alive, which features a younger Nengudi and Hassinger with Franklin Parker at California State University, Los Angeles. The footage begins with the trio standing with their hands interlocked, singing and rocking their bodies back to front. Wearing white prosthetic extensions on their fingers, the performers rhythmically splay their hands. They then spin and twirl before collapsing on the ground to kiss it. Moments of Alive come to formally mirror moments of the studio performance pictured later in the video. Their fingers, doubled in size by props, recall earlier motifs of the hand, while the Nengudi and Hassinger of 1980 and of 2006 each wrap their bodies around one another. Later in the video, photographs from Flying picture Hassinger, Nengudi, Parker, and Ulysses Jenkins traversing the lawn of the Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery. In one photograph, the 4 performers are shown in flowing white garments, crouching with their hands behind their backs. As Hassinger and Nengudi alternate, crouching and standing in their studio performance, their 1982 movements again reverberate forward in time, informing their present moment.
In Side by Side, documentation of the past compounds and collides with Nengudi and Hassinger's studio space, animating the pair's present actions with images seen seconds earlier. According to filmic conventions, montage that interrupts a stable moment or the chronological order of events often represents some kind of internal state or action, such as memory, fantasy, or dreams. Because Side by Side is set in a relatively stable time and place, these moments that belong to a historical before quickly come to read as memories playing in their imaginations in real time. Whereas Side by Side builds a continuous internal experience on behalf of Nengudi and Hassinger, it begins to approximate their process. The formal construction of the works to neither differentiate between subjectivities nor attend to the strict segmentation of time. Rather, the past tense of their collaboration, represented by documentation, is collapsed into the present. In this way, Side by Side finds precedence in Henri Bergson's theories of durée, as formulated in his Time and Free Will. Bergson defines durée, or duration, as pure, unadulterated intercontinuity, firmly disputing the division of time into linear or numerical units, such as seconds, hours, days, or months, is true to the flux of lived experience. He insists time is felt as opposed to measured. According to Bergson's reconceptualization of time and consciousness, the past and its associated images are never isolated from the present, but are always accruing. And Side by Side, Nengudi and Hassinger's bodies are visually loaded with images of their past, making memory the material through which they're able to synthesize their experiences. In the tradition of Duret, the possibility for absolute distinction between moments is rendered obsolete as the before is engulfed into the now. This idea of memory loading present movement, which is formally represented by the film, also has resonance with how Nengudi and Hassinger have talked about their process. Nengudi recalls meeting in different spaces around Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s to play out their encounters, after which they would return to their studios all charged up. In her manifesto, Hassinger invokes a particular experience in which Nengudi took her to a demolition site and they both, quote, agreed it was a big hole, end quote. Years later, Hassinger would make swirling round wire rope pieces that she understands to have come from visiting that demolition site with Nengudi. She calls this type of collaboration, quote, a shared moment individually interpreted, end quote. Eventually, Nengudi would relocate to Colorado Springs and Hassinger would go to New York. While opportunities for wandering the city together became less spontaneous, both maintain that their ongoing relationship and communication still ensures their creative survival in spite of their geographic distance. By attributing her swirling round wire rope pieces to that shared moment, Hassinger collaborates with the younger Nengudi while maintaining her relationship to her friend in real time. She uses memory as her material, placing their collaborative process in a time unrestrained by external frames of reference.
While their collaboration is presented as living in the tangled temporality of the interior, the use of performance documentation as a surrogate for memory disorients this interpretation. Most traditionally, performance documentation is thought of attempting to reproduce moments in an objectively truthful and stable manner. In the Barthesian sense, the camera is understood as witness to a moment that really happened, and thus maintains a connection to historical in the flesh reality. While the appropriation of a medium so tied to objectivity to represent something as subjective as memory may seem contradictory, let us consider side by side with readings of remains and objective reality as laid out in contextures.
In 1978, Linda Good Bryant and Marcia S. Phillips conceived of contextualism as an aesthetic tradition united in opposing objective reality through what they call remains. They identify Senga Nengudi, David Hammonds, Jenny Hamilton, Susan Fitzsimmons, and others working in and around Studio Z as participating in this practice. They point to Los Angeles and New York as contextualist hubs. Good, Bryant, and Phillips describe the contextualists as working in an approach analogous to modal logic, where given realities are presented as optional and mere possibilities. While abstract expressionism is concerned with the physical, perceptual, and metaphysical processes of a reality, contextualism finds roots in earlier Dadaist and Surrealist philosophies that attend to the internal as much as the external. By synthesizing the whole of a reality, the contextualist artist, quote, acts as a medium, end quote, using personal perceptions and accumulative experiences to define themselves relative to the outside world.
Critically, Good, Bryant, and Phillips find the use of remains to be a common denominator of contextualist works. Remains can be qualified as something left over from a primary action and have consisted of materials ranging from dryer lint, clothes, smoke, sand and hair to wax, grease, paper dots from hole punch paper and wood. While the authors find parallels between contextualist remains and the ready-mades and discards of Dadaism, they find the properties and functions of remains to be stable while its meaning is utterly transient and in flux in accordance with its context. While Duchamp's fountain lost its, quote, physical, perceptual, and metaphysical, end quote, elements when it was displayed at the Grand Central Palace, contextualist remains like that of David Hammonds' hair and Mary's can retains its function and properties, while the meaning of the hair has dramatically changed since leaving Hammond's head. Where fountain was transformed from urinal to sculpture, Hammonds' hair became hair and sculpture.
As Nengudi and Hassinger synthesize internal and external phenomena, in this case, memory and movement, to reach for their context whole, their contextualist sensibilities become apparent. This aesthetic loyalty is deepened by their use of performance documentation and side-by-side, a medium which lends itself to definitions of remains and comes to stand for the accumulative experiences at the center of contextures. A type of leftover in itself, performance documentation ostensibly exists to recall the primary action that is performance. Where contextualist artists working with material remains, such as dryer lint, clothes, smoke, and sand, layer meaning onto objects through physical displacement, As filmic remains, the performance documentation in side-by-side is transplanted by way of montage and the loss of typical signifiers that describe documentary footage with historical function, such as dates, titles, and credits. But in spite of this loss, and in the true fashion of Goodbrien and Phillips contextures, the archival footage included in side-by-side does not lose legibility as performance documentation. Like Murray's can, in which Hammond's hair could exist as hair and sculpture, the appropriated film lives in side-by-side as performance documentation and memory. Because the footage retains its physical, perceptual, and metaphysical makeup while gaining status as memory, the perceived mimetic capabilities of performance documentation are neutralized. Within the video, the impetus to make out historical characters, reconstruct specific spaces, and interrupt a moment in all its truth and accuracy is lost to the dual meaning taken on by the footage. What is essentially a chronological survey of collaborative performances by Nengudi and Hassinger forgoes its representational allegiance to the historical real.
As much as the archival footage in side-by-side takes on the form of memory, the images do not read as particularly personal to Hassinger and Nengudi. The first archival photographs to appear are the famous images of the collaborators stretching and tugging the nylon of Nengudi's RSVP. In another, they sit next to each other, seemingly in the midst of conversation and dressed in matching leotards. These black and white stills of Performance Piece, Nylon Mesh, and Maren Hassinger are by far the most circulated images of their practice, representing just some of the many iconic documents that punctuate side-by-side. But if the formal conventions of the video ask us to interpret these documents as memory, then the decision to mobilize recognizable images that already belong to the public domain competes with any intimacy or sense of interiority that might otherwise be connoted. Rather, they read as distanced and devoid of the kinds of personal content we might expect from filmic memory. While documentation is measured by an ability to catalog experience, memory too might be understood as constituting its own kind of historical artifact. In the context of history writing, memory lays claim to an internal reality that might be mined for descriptive evidence of Hassinger and Nengudi's collaboration, just as performance documentation might be studied to evidence an external experience. These popular images, of which many were already publicly available, neutralize memory and side-by-side as a potential source and bring the footage into a state of formalism. Weaving in and out of 1977, 1980, and 2006, the video conveys a process of compounding experience while critically de-emphasizing the contents of those recollections. As such, the film seems to approximate the movement of Duret in its state of flow.
Rather than attending to the content of dreams and interiorities like his contemporaries, Henri Bergson was concerned with the processes and mechanism of immediate experience and temporality. Where the psychoanalyst often asks what of internal happenings, Bergson attended to the how. But illustrating this how posed representational challenges, as he believed that Duret and other interior experiences cannot and should not be objectified or spatialized. His method consisted of using poetics to put into language that which he found otherwise impossible to articulate. In his duration and simultaneity, Bergson employs his famous metaphor of flow to describe Duret. Quote, "There is no doubt but that for us, time is at first identical with the continuity of our inner life. What is this continuity? That of flow or passage, but a self-sufficient flow or passage. The flow not implying a thing that flows, and the passing not presupposing states through which we pass. The thing and the state are only artificially taken snapshots of the transition. And this transition that is naturally experienced is duration itself." Interpreting Bergson, Paul Atkinson sensitively notes the ways in which the philosopher who so markedly opposed representation still brought Duret to a conceptual head through language. For Atkinson, flow can refer to the feeling of time through which consciousness, while also working to anchor time spatially. Through metaphor, the material associations of objects or landscapes which we already know to flow, such as rivers, silk, or hair, are conjured. In this way, Bergson describes Duret with a multitude of abstract images and meanings that intertwine and gesture towards a whole. But by orienting his philosophies around rhetorical devices and images, he still evades the prescription or absoluteness he contests. For Atkinson, these metaphors come to represent Bergson's incomplete images or intermediary, incomplete, transient devices that formally emulate fleeting experiences such as consciousness or time. To quote Bergson, images here are not the ornament, but the sole means of expressing intuition and thought.
Bergson found solace in a poetics of incomplete images, which enabled him to trace a permeable line around his philosophies. Indulging this metaphor of drawing, perhaps in a Bergsonian manner, Atkinson likens incomplete images to a sketch, posing that his use of metaphor and associated images evades the supposed stability and opacity of representation. For Atkinson, a sketch differs from a representation because it describes a particular way of seeing through an object rather than substituting it. A formulated means of transparency, the sketch is notably more mobile than the representation due to the implied movement of the line that follows the contour of the real and the fact that it presents itself as unfinished. Erica Nengudi identifies the historical and interdisciplinary significance of drafting and sketching as lying in the ways in which the medium connects internal ruminations with objective experience via movement. Speaking of Raphael's use of metal-tipped stylus, which left invisible impressions, in later Leonardo da Vinci's preliminary sketches, she asks, "What are we to make of the trace whose purpose is effectively to dispense with visibility and mimesis altogether?" In part, her answer lies in how sketching, tracing, and drafting facilitates the making of originary sense impressions while allowing the flux of imagination to remain intact. Rather than substituting what one feels or witnesses with a representation, a sketch is a kind of process that draws us closer to life as lived.
Like a sketch or life drawing made from overlapping lines and haphazard scoring, side-by-side resists legibility in any absolute sense. The video brings the opposing realities of inner and outer to an airy agreement, one which anchors the elusive philosophies of time, relationality, and experience only knowable in their state of flux. Using performance documentation as a prop to direct their audience through different moments and spaces, Nengudi and Hassinger deceive those representations of collaboration principally concerned with description and objecthood. Atkinson asks, how is it possible to render the living movement of an idea except in a form that recreates that movement? And side by side, collaboration is presented not as a knowable entity, but as a process where the synthesis of internal and external is fluid and volatile. Nengudi and Hassinger resist solidification and instead represent collaboration as a living process, akin to Bergson's Durée. If Hassinger and her poetics evade opaque subjectivities, side by side presents the we, I, us, me, Maren, and Senga as undefined by discrete and discernible moments. And what emerges as a temporal contour, Nengudi and Hassinger outline their shared reality. And what is collaboration if not a mutual agreement on where to trace those lines?
In writing this paper, we continually drew and then erased lines between ourselves and Nengudi and Hassinger. We plotted and unplotted ourselves onto the temporal and relational models etched into side by side, and conjured anecdotes of our own about what it means to maintain a relationship predicated on mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual admiration. In our years of working together, we have lacked tools to name ourselves in a way that felt true. By giving us side by side and so generously sharing their commitment to one another, Nengudi and Hassinger have laid a foundation for articulating what does and perhaps should escape concreteness. If all other connections between us and them are mere projections, then we are at least two pairs of long-term collaborators that concur on the pitfalls and possibilities of representing a process we are also devotedly attend to. That wraps up our presentation today. Thank you so much to Dr. Cross, Dr. Arnold, and Nasher for having us here. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Macaella and Zoe, for that amazing presentation and paper. Exploring some really profound ideas about Hassinger and Nengudi's decades-long relationship and collaboration and side-by-side, and bringing up some really impressive theories there. Bergson's radical reconceptualization and Linda Good Bryant and Phillips contextualism. So lots of important theories there for us to think of. And I love your idea about their documentation as a sketch. So thank you so much, you both, for that impressive research and for drawing our attention to this important work. Well, that concludes our program for today. And this is our third installment in our 4-day symposium. Tomorrow, we have an exciting roundtable discussion with myself leading and our participants. And we have our keynote tomorrow with the amazing and wonderful Dr. Kellie Jones. So please, please, please return with us tomorrow. And as I said before, if you missed anything, make sure that you revisit our earlier programs and come back and see us tomorrow. Thanks for coming by.